Hey, so I just wanted to make a video that kind of introduces people to Guild Wars 1 PvP as a monk. Um, this is going to be intended for people that have little to no experience in PvP, or maybe somebody that has no experience playing a monk in PvP. There's not going to be a lot of content that is new for somebody who's experienced or well versed in PvP by any means. So, with that being said, the most important thing when it comes to monking is you need to make sure that you have the correct armor. So, on every piece of your armor, your head, chest, hands, legs, and feet, you need to make sure that you have your Disciples insignia. The reason that we use a Disciples insignia is because almost every spike that you're going to be receiving as a monk, whether it be in random arenas, Heroes Ascent, or Guild versus Guild, is going to be accompanied by a condition. So, think Lightning Surge comes with cracked armor. When a Hammer Warrior attacks you, they generally inflict you with a deep wound. Rangers tend to spread poison. So all these things use conditions. There's very few spikes that don't use conditions, so it's almost always going to be beneficial. Another reason it's really beneficial is because most monk builds, like the one that I currently have equipped, use draw conditions, which brings the condition to you. So the condition is least harmful on you than it is on other players because you at least benefit by getting 15 armor, whereas nobody else will get that. The next thing you need to do is work on your runes. So we're always going to have a minor rune in whichever healing area you're going, whether that be protection prayers or healing prayers. And then we need to have a superior vigor rune. And then we need to have a rune of recovery because that reduces days, which isn't that big of an issue because that's not used too often, but because it reduces deep wound. Deep wound effectively reduces your healing by 20% because it reduces your max health by 20%. So you need to get deep wound off of you as fast as possible. And then you need to bring a rune of restoration because it reduces your cripple duration. The reason you need to get rid of that is because being crippled is not just annoying, but it really makes it impossible for you to kite. So you're not really worried too much about the bleeding duration, but it's the cripple and the deep wound that are the major things here. And then lastly, you can bring protection if you want, but I generally go for like a minor rune of divine favor just to bump up your healing a little bit on every spell that you cast. Now, the next thing you really need to look at is weapon sets. You need to first make sure that you have all your weapon sets checked so that you can see them all. A lot of people maybe don't know about this if you only play PvE casually, but we're going to be swapping through weapon sets consistently throughout the game in PvP as a monk. So I'm going to focus on the weapons that you'd bring as a healing monk and not so much as a protection prayers monk, but there is not a huge difference. Um, so for a healing monk, you're going to want to have your 40-40 set. So that's just your rod that has a 20% recharge time and a 20% cast time chance. And then you have the same thing on your focus, which is why it's called a 40-40 set. This is important for two reasons. One, it allows you to occasionally cast faster. And the reason you want to cast faster is so that you can make it much harder for your enemies to interrupt you, whether it's a mesmer or a ranger, etc. And then the second thing is it also has a chance to reduce your recharge time. So that means that you'll be able to heal a lot faster. That's not so important on skills like Word of Healing, where the recharge time is already pretty low, but it's pretty important on skills that have a longer recharge time. So think of something like Cure Hex. If it goes from 12 seconds to 6 seconds, that's pretty major. Now you need to also have a defense set. So a defense set generally is accompanied by a spear. Some people use a sword, but if you use a spear, you can use more defensive options like Bonetti's defense because you can gain adrenaline from far away. And then you have a shield. Most people opt to go for armor on their spear as opposed to the 30 HP. That is because armor is going to help you versus every source of damage except for chaos damage from a mesmer. And then on your shield, you're going to want to have an armor plus 10 versus every damage type. I'm really lazy. I don't personally have that. But You want to have one versus lightning, versus fire. Earth is less common. Cold is even less common. But then you want to have it against blunt damage, piercing damage, slashing damage. And then lastly, you really want to have a shield that reduces your cripple duration so that you can kite better, or if you're on a map that has lava, you don't stay crippled as long in the lava and you can out kite somebody in the lava. Then you want to make sure that you have a staff that gives you 20% enchantment duration, increased enchantment duration. The reason this is beneficial is, like in this build, for example, we're running shielding hands. We'd like it to be a little bit longer than 8 seconds so that they get reduced damage for longer. That's useful for skills like Guardian, and Spirit Bond. Anything that's an enchantment, this benefits, except for Patient Spirit. Don't ever cast Patient Spirit while on this, because you don't want to make your Patient Spirit take longer to wear off, and that's how that one heals. But any other spell that's an enchantment that I can think of off the top of my head benefits. Even Vigorous Spirit is fine. Anything like that works. And then your last weapon set is going to be your high energy set. This is your last resort. This is when you've run out of all your energy and you have to keep your team up. Now, something that's important to note about this is I've seen newer monk players go to their high set, but then they don't leave their high set. You have to make sure that when you're on your high set, in times of downtime, when you're not casting a spell or you've run out of energy on your high set, that you switch out of it. You're only getting 2 energy regeneration. You have to go back to getting 4 energy regeneration. It's very, very, very crucial. Don't just sit on your high set. Cast a couple of spells. If you know you're going to cast to give rejuve, go back to your low set. That's absolutely mandatory. And then something else that you need to just keep in mind is that you don't have to always be switching weapons, but if you learn how to switch weapons effectively, then you're going to become a much better monk player than the one who kind of sits on their 40-40 set and only switches to their defense set when they're being attacked, and only switches to their prot staff whenever they're actually playing a prot build as opposed to a healing build. No, you should switch to your prot staff when you're going to cast Shielding Hands or Guardian or Spirit Bonds or Shield of Absorption. Try to stay in your defense set as long as possible. You don't need to cast in your 40-40 set because you're going to be squishier. You can cast in your 40-40 set if you think you're being camped by a Mesmer or a Ranger and you're trying to avoid interruptions. But other than that, you can stay in your defense set. So just keep things like that in mind, that if you become pretty adept at swapping your weapons, you go from being like a pretty decent monk to being an above average monk. It also can help you with energy management. So for example, right now I'm running a -5 energy spear. That might make it harder to cast from your defense set because you have 25 energy as opposed to 30. But what it does do is it lets you hide energy from enemy mesmers. That's pretty important because there's a lot of mesmers that run either energy surge or some form of energy drain and or denial. And if you can switch to this set all the time, then you're going to give them less of your energy to be working with. And then when you switch to your 40-40 set, you're still going to have about 17 energy left, even if they drain everything out of your 25. So it helps. Whereas if you were at 30 energy and you switch to this, then you're only going to have 12 energy to work with. So you're saving a whole extra spell's worth of energy. It also lets you eat shame for much less energy cost. So if somebody puts shame on you and you absolutely have to cast through it, you first cast on your low energy set and then you go straight to your 40-40. It's just something to keep in mind. The next thing I want to kind of talk about is kind of like a rough guide for what you should be looking for when it comes to like a build. And I'm mostly going to be focusing on random arenas because that's where I've played the most. But it kind of can fit for most PvP scenarios, whether that be Heroes Ascent or Guild versus Guild. So what you want to make sure that you have is you always want to make sure that you have some form of hex removal, whether it's Cure Hex, Spotless Mind, Holy Veil, any of these. You need to have some form of hex removal. That's the main reason why you are a better healer than a Ritualist. A Ritualist has no form of hex removal, no easily accessible form of hex removal. The second thing that you need to make sure that you have is some form of condition removal. Most people go for draw conditions, and that's it. This build happens to have two forms of condition removal: purge conditions and draw conditions. And then the third really important thing for any monk build is you have to have some sort of defensive option. For right now, I'm having Protector's defense. Some people go for Bonetti's defense. You can go to an Assassin and have Return or Dark Escape or Smoke Powder defense, but you have to have some defensive option. And then if you're able to, it is always nice to work in some form of energy management skill. For me, this is generally Signet of Rejuvenation. There's other ones. You can get Bonetti's Stance that gives you 5 energy anytime you block. The only downside is you have to build up the adrenaline to use this. You can do Warrior Stance, but that costs 10 energy, so you're potentially losing out. But there's other energy management skills. You could go Healer's Covenant, which is just an elite that gives you energy management. So you need to keep all these things in mind when you're building a build for random arenas. But you can play around pretty easily. I mean, if you wanted to really go heavy on the energy management, you could try to make a Boon Signet build. So it all just depends. And then make sure that your secondary is something that helps you defensively. That is really important. So Warrior is the most common. The second most common would be Assassin. And then you start running into more niche things, whether it's like a Ranger for Melanju's Resilience, or maybe you're trying to go a D-Shot Monk with Natural Stride and D-Shot. You can go Dervish for Armor of Sanctity, something like that. You could theoretically go Mesmer for like Elemental Resistance if you know you're facing an only Elementalist team. But or Hexbreaker if you're facing a lot of hexes. So just make sure you have some secondary that helps you in some way defensively. And then just some general useful tips and tricks would be like, make sure you have all of your skills keybinded where you don't have to click them. Clicking on your skill and then clicking on your party window is just going to take that much longer to heal them. The same thing with your weapon sets. You're going to be swapping through them fluidly, so you need to make sure that you have them keybinded to something that is comfortable for you. If you want to be really advanced, you can keybind your party windows. I personally don't do this. A lot of people that I think play today don't do it, but most of the top players back in the day, to my knowledge, keybinded their party windows. In PvP, it's also really good to click to move. You can use WASD, and I know quite a few people that do, but just make sure you're comfortable with click to move as well for when you do need to use it. The reason that click to move is superior is because click to move has absolutely 0 movement penalty no matter where you click. Your character's always going to be going at the same speed, whereas I'm going to switch to WASD and you'll see like when I turn, I move slightly slower. When I backpedal, I move significantly slower. So you incur movement penalty using WASD that you do not incur when you're clicking to move. That is just something to keep in mind. The last kind of tip that I can give for a new player is try to get used to and build the habit of tab targeting through your enemies. So what I mean by that is just tab through your enemy team. So if you're in RA, just keep tabbing through all 4 enemy players so that you can see when the Mesmer is casting Empathy on your warrior, or you can see when the Elementalist is casting Blinding Flash. These kinds of things let you react faster. If you don't react fast enough, sometimes these things can get covered. So if you're not running draw conditions, let's say you're running dismiss condition, you really need to make sure you're on top of the blind because you can only remove 1 condition at a time. Let's say you're not running Spotless Mind, but you're running Cure Hex like I am. You really need to remove Empathy as it comes out so that it doesn't get covered by another Hex. These are very important things that will take you from being, like I said, a decent monk player to just an above average monk player. Something else that you should keep in mind is it is okay to red bar. And what red bar means when it comes to healing is that you're just mainly looking at your party window. You just look at these, and when these go down, you click on them and you heal them. That's what red bar healing is. Whereas kind of what I was talking about earlier, where you're tab targeting and looking at your enemy, is more of like field of view healing. So that can expand more. So you're not only going to be looking at your enemies, you're going to be like, oh, this guy has a warrior following him, so I should be putting guardian on him so that the warrior has less of a chance to hit him. So field of view healing is superior to red bar healing, but it is okay if you are a red bar healer. Just know that if you can incorporate field of view healing, you will go once again from being just a decent average monk to being above average, because you're going to have knowledge of what is happening in the game. And if you have your field of view and you're aware of everything, then you can also position yourself better, potentially take less damage. You can see when an elementalist turns towards you, which means they're going to be casting at you. Then you can put a protection spell on yourself, etc. Um, Hopefully this was clear. Hopefully I didn't go through it too quickly. If there's anything that didn't make sense, be sure to let me know. If there's a specific question that you might have, let me know. Like I said, this is kind of geared towards newer players or people that are just entering the PvP scene. There's nothing too terribly advanced here. So yeah, just let me know if there's anything that you need clarity on.